Leo. Leo. Hey, buddy. Last night, I cast on the Friday Slipover V-Neck by PetiteKnit. This is my first ever PetiteKnit pattern. From what I can tell so far, it is pretty straightforward. I'm not worried about it being too complicated. I have heard about her patterns that the English translation can be a little bit hit or miss in terms of the clarity, and her pattern writing style tends to be more minimalistic and doesn't go super in depth on maybe the more complicated elements of the construction, things like that. I'm confident enough in my knitting skills to sort of work through those types of nuances, but that is something that I've heard about her patterns. This is the progress I've had so far. Like I said, I cast on last night. I probably put a couple hours into it this morning, and this is sort of the back. You start with casting on the back. What surprised me is that there is no type of short row shaping to raise the back. I think it's probably because this is a V-neck. So just the nature of a V-neck, it's going to dip further in the front, so you don't necessarily need the short row shaping. But I was expecting some type of shaping to give a slope to the shoulders, and that is not happening from what I can tell by reading the pattern. You obviously casting on straight for the back, and then when you go to do the front sections, you're just picking up stitches and knitting the V from there. So there's no type of shoulder shaping included in the pattern, but it is what it is. I mean, I'm no pattern writing expert. I'm sure it'll knit up perfectly fine. My gauge is a little bit off from the pattern. I know I said I got 22 stitches per 4 inches on a 4.5 millimeter needle, but that fabric was a little bit looser than I wanted. So I went down to a 4 millimeter needle, which is actually what this pattern calls for. And my gauge is working up a little bit tighter, maybe 1 to 2 stitches additional per 4 inches. So I decided to just cast on the extra large size. I didn't do any specific math to see what sort of measurements that this combo will give me considering my gauge. I'm pairing a lighter gray yarn with the black mohair, and I really like this combination. So the first mohair project I worked on, the vest number 1, I liked it. I wear it a lot. But if I had to do it again, I would probably choose a different color combination. And I'm really happy with this mohair combination. Emily from High Fiber Knits talks about this a lot, and how she really enjoys pairing lighter lighter yarns with darker mohairs, because the way she words it is that it gives sort of a glowing from within effect. And I completely agree. To me, there's almost an iridescence to what you're getting here. I think that is helped by the fact that this yarn has quite a bit of sheen to it, and I think this shows that pretty accurately. It has quite a bit of sheen, very silky yarn. And so I'm really in love with this yarn combination. I'm about halfway through the first section before I'm able to do the arm shaping on the back. I'm really enjoying it. I like the way the yarn is knitting up. Obviously, I like the color, so all of that is really good. But the broken rib is also pretty meditative to work through. I'm probably going to be singing a different tune later in the project when I'm tired of it. I'm probably going to be singing a different tune later in the project when I'm tired of it. But as of right now, I really like the variety of knitting on the right sides and 1x1 rib on the wrong side. It keeps me engaged, and I really, really am enjoying it. So we'll see how this progresses. Making my way through the right side. Left side is complete as of last night. And I just got some pretty stressful news, work-related news. And I'm just taking a knitting break to cope. Because that's what knitters do, right? That's like, this is very on brand for me. So I'm taking a break, then I'm gonna go walk my dog, have a quick meeting, and then do a workout, hence my current attire. But I just wanted to check in to show you where I'm at. So you can probably see a mess behind me. That is my desk, and this plant doesn't live here. It's a whole thing. I just repotted it, and it has grown to become a floor plant, and I feel like in the next year or two it will be too tall to keep in my house. So I'll cross that bridge when I get there, but there's that. On my agenda after recording this clip is cleaning my office. So anyway, project update. So here's what it's looking like. I have it on a hanger here for ease of showing, you know, what it looks like. I'm really loving this fabric. I feel like the halo, the fuzz of this mohair isn't really gonna come across on camera, but I'm really, really liking it. And mohair is one of those things for me in a lot of ways that is annoyingly trendy. Everybody's working with it. All the designers are designing with mohair. Fingering weight plus mohair is just like the new buzzword of the knitting community. But I get it. This is my second mohair project, as I probably mentioned in a previous clip, and the more this piece grows, the more I enjoy just squishing it, and I know it's going to be super luxurious. So I can't, you don't knock it until you try it, and now that I've tried it, I really, really get it. So a few things have happened since I last filmed the clip. First, I finished the shoulder pieces and I joined in the round. So as you can see, I am working on the body. I'm finally working in the round, which for broken rib is not as exciting as it sounds, because it's actually the same the same stitches and sequence of stitches. So it's not like when I'm working stockinette flat, I have to purl every wrong side row. Here, you're knitting around, you're doing knit one, purl one on the following round. And then in the flat, you're knitting on the right side, knit one, purl one on the wrong side. So I'm actually doing the same thing. So joining in the round is not the reprieve that it often is for other patterns. So that was kind of disheartening. The other thing I'm struggling with here is that I'm a little bored. This, even though it's a vest, it's smaller scale than say a sweater, because it's all over broken rib It's really testing my knitting endurance at this point, and I'm finding myself wanting to somehow break up the monotony. And I can't really tell you why this is dragging for me, because I've done way more larger scale involved projects that are more complicated than this as well. But there's something about the broken rib that is just really killing me a little bit inside. I cannot articulate what it is. Add to that the fact that the gauge is pretty small, so the yarn I'm using is classified as a DK that I'm holding with the mohair, but it's really a fingering weight, honestly, as far as I'm concerned. And working with a 4mm needle, it's just, and I'm knitting the size extra large, so there are a lot of stitches on the needle. It's just testing my endurance, like I said. I also wanted to talk a little bit about process knitter versus product knitter. Part of the reason I'm struggling so much with this project is because I am a textbook product knitter. What does that mean? I cast on a project because I want the thing. I want the end result. I see a picture of what the final project looks like. I want it. I decide to cast it on. Other makers tend to be process knitters, which is just basically they are along for the ride, so to speak. Not necessarily in it for that finished object, but more so doing it for the joy of the making. That's not to say that I don't enjoy knitting, because obviously I enjoy knitting. This is why we're all here. But it's not the thing that gets me going, if you know what I mean. So for me, it's really important when I cast something on that I want the final project, and that's the whole reason for me embarking on the journey, is because I want the thing. It also for me means that I don't tend to leave projects unfinished. I don't tend to have multiple whips, because for me that just dilutes the process and prolongs the completion of a project. I kind of just hone in on one thing at a time. Boom, boom, boom. That is my making process. I've encountered a lot of people on the internet recently who also have similar sort of philosophies when it comes to knitting projects, but I think knowing that and the fact that the broken rib texture in this pattern is not really the most fun to work on. It's kind of tedious, very simple, but tedious. That's kind of contributing to my struggle a little bit, because I think about how much more of this stitch pattern that I have to do, and I'm just like, save me, somebody save me. But the only way, what is it? The only way out is through. Well, I don't know what the expression is, but the point is, I just have to knit it. Like, there's no escaping it. I'm not casting on anything else. I just have to see this project to completion, and I'll probably whine about it the whole way through. But it is what it is. Other thing I wanted to share is that I purchased something to make knitting on this really dark yarn. Very dark yarn, a little bit more bearable, and it's a neck light. I felt so old when I bought this, but I also felt really satisfied when I realized that it just totally changed the game. Like, I will never make fun of old blind people again. Not that I make fun of old blind people, but you get what I mean. Like, this is not something I envision myself purchasing and using so religiously. But the thing about this, obviously it's a dark colored yarn, which is one thing. The other thing working against me is that it's not plain stockinette, which I can typically knit without looking down. The third thing working against me is that obviously there's mohair, which totally impacts the stitch definition and how easy it is to see the stitches. Yeah, so I had a lot of things working against me, making this not the easiest thing to work on. For example, at night, which for me is my prime knitting time. I love to knit at night in front of the TV, and we don't keep the overhead lights on, so sometimes it's difficult to see depending on what I'm working on, but with this it is nearly impossible. And although like every other row is straight knitting, which I can typically do without looking, it's a little bit harder to ensure that I'm not splitting the yarn, and it's a little less intuitive to knit into like knit above a purl stitch, for example. So it's not as fluid as just round after round of stockinette, even on the straight knitting rounds. So it requires a little bit more deliverance. Is that a word? You kind of have to be more intentional about it, because if I'm not careful, I could screw up some stitches, and because it's so hard to see and the yarn is so dark, it will be probably difficult for me to even notice that I made a mistake. And I haven't made any major mistakes at this point. Like, my stitch count is exactly what it needs to be. My stitches look good and even. Again, this is not a complicated project, but it's a lot of knitting and tiny needles. So I'm struggling a little bit. Look how gloomy it is outside. I think I'm gonna spend the rest of my workday out there until it starts raining, so I can get some fresh air. Anyway, here's where we are. According to my gauge math, this is all very haphazard, but I am about 4 inches away from being able to switch to the 1x1 ribbing for the bottom hem. And my measurements tell me that I have somewhere between 8 and 9 rounds per inch. So 9 times 4 is 36. I have about 36 to 40 rounds of, hey Leo, about, let's just round up and say 40 rounds to be done with the body. And I think I'm gonna aim to have 10 to 15 rounds per day. Today is Monday, so that hopefully by the end of the work week, the body will be done and I can spend the weekend doing the hem ribbing. And then I feel like the rest of the knitting will just be relatively quick, and maybe by Monday of next week, I'll be able to cast this baby off and get it blocked and move on with my life. Far, far away from broken rib until I do my Friday tea, which is on the docket. So yeah, that's where I'm at. So this is my vest number 1, which is a design by My Favorite Things Knitwear. I knit this up with Knit Picks Gloss DK, held double with Knit Picks Aloft Mohair. And this, you won't be able to see it from this picture, but the fabrics are totally different. I would consider the Gloss DK more of a true DK yarn. And I don't have any scraps left over to give a side-by-side comparison, but I think earlier in the video I mentioned that this DK yarn was just really just a fingering masquerading as a DK. But anyway, not what this is for. I'm going to kind of try to arrange these so that they are one on top of the other, so we can compare where we are in terms of the length. So I have tried my best to line up the shoulders here at the top so we can see what the relative length looks like. As we can see, the Friday slipover is a little bit longer. It's hard to see. I would say it's probably 1/4 of an inch longer in its current state. And so this is all not an exact science, because obviously this is an alpaca blend yarn. I anticipate this will grow quite a bit once I block it. All I wanted to make sure that I was able to do was to make it longer than my vest number 1. And so if I follow PetiteKnit's pattern in terms of how long to knit the body, which at this point I'm pretty sure I have maybe an inch or 2 left before I can start the ribbing, then I know that what I'll end up with here is much longer than what I have here, which is all I really wanted. Okay. It's been a while. Okay. Friday Slipover V-Neck. Okay. Why do I feel like it's crooked? Well, we just have to deal with that. It's definitely crooked though. I don't like that. Anyway. It's been several months, almost 3 months since I finished my Friday Slipover V-Neck, and I'm just now carving out the time to record a clip with my thoughts. And yeah, I don't know why I procrastinated. I think towards the end of knitting this project, I was just over it. It was late June. We were getting into some really peak summer weather and temperatures, and the last thing I wanted to do was touch or think about or wear mohair. And so the desire to even talk about this project was just completely gone. I was just over it. And I was knitting it up. And that's one thing I will say about this project. It is a test of your knitting stamina. So if you are someone who doesn't do well with more long-term projects, doesn't do well with tedious knitting, and doing the same thing over and over again, this vest is probably not for you. So yeah, after a certain while, I was just so tired of doing broken rib or rib. I just wanted to escape into some stockinette. And so yeah, this tested me in a lot of different ways, but it didn't test me enough because I have, since completing this, started another broken rib pattern. Actually, same designer, same family of patterns. I'll talk more about that a little bit later, but clearly it tested me, but I passed the test and I'm here. I'm still here knitting broken rib. But anyway, this is how it turned out. I will get some footage of me standing up and showing you how it fits properly. I knit the size extra large. I used a 3.5 and 4 millimeter needles. I have no idea if my gauge was the same as the pattern gauge. I guess I could measure it, but I'm not going to because it fits and it is what it is now. But yeah, that's really it. I love my color choice. I love the dark charcoal marled color that I got with holding the gray yarn and the black mohair. As I was knitting this up, I really fell in love with the combination, and if I find myself in the market for knitting another mohair garment, I might do a similar combination. I do have a mohair sweater idea in my mind that's not this color combo, but I definitely want to make something else with this fabric. Yeah, I really love the way it turned out. It's heathered and marled, and I think it's gonna fit really nicely into my wardrobe. Right now I'm just wearing it with a t-shirt and some jeans, but I anticipate being able to wear this to work, which is really cool. And yeah, I'm just really happy with how it turned out. Now, this was my first PetiteKnit pattern, and I kind of went into it not really knowing what to expect. Like, I know PetiteKnit is extremely popular as far as knitwear designers are concerned. I see her patterns everywhere. Every podcaster that you watch have probably made something from PetiteKnit, and there are a few that come to mind that are really devout PetiteKnit followers, and that's the only thing that they ever make. And so, yeah, I feel like she has developed somewhat of a cult-like following within the knitting community. And I'm not saying it's a good or bad thing, it just is what it is. So her stuff is everywhere. And I think her designs are really nice. She has something for everyone. And I just appreciate how classic and understated a lot of her patterns are. And that's one of the things that stood out to me about this particular pattern. That's why I chose to make it. As far as the pattern itself, it was very simple and straightforward. It's not very hand-holdy, which as I become more experienced as a knitter, I'm actually learning to appreciate that more, because I do find that some patterns are very detailed, very step by step. They will hold your hand every step of the way, and for a beginner knitter, I think that can be really helpful. But as a more experienced knitter, it can make it a little more tedious to follow than necessary. Like when I read through a pattern that is just really heavily worded and overly explained, I find myself sort of tripping up over what the instructions are and not really having the easiest time working it up. And I think PetiteKnit's pattern definitely caters to the more experienced knitters who don't need that level of hand holding. One example that comes to my mind as it relates to this pattern is when you're doing the V-neck shaping. This is top down, yeah. So you're doing increases to achieve the V-neck shaping. She only lists out the row by row instructions for one side, and then for the other side, all it says is to just mirror what you did on the other side. So on the first side. So an experienced knitter would interpret that properly to mean, okay, if I did make one rights on the first side, I'm gonna do make one lefts on the second side, and I'm gonna make sure that those make ones are on the inner part to achieve the V-neck shaping, and that the armhole shaping will be on the outside part. Everything is mirrored. I totally get what that means. But for a new knitter, they might be like, wait, what? So I can see why people might appreciate that, and I can also see why that might intimidate some people. But overall, the pattern was perfectly sufficient. I was able to work this up with no issues whatsoever. Another thing that I've heard about PetiteKnit patterns is that they are very, not intricate, maybe that's not the word, but they're very well written and thoughtfully designed. I don't think I've knit enough of her patterns to be able to say that one way or the other, and everything is subject to everyone's personal knitting experience, so I'm not even gonna pretend to be a subject matter expert on how good or not good a pattern is. But for this particular pattern, it's very simple. So there is no shaping on the back. So the only other vests, I've knit two other vests before this. Both of them included some slope shaping along the shoulders. This pattern did not include that. It was just, you knit a rectangle for the back, you do the arm shaping, you pick up the stitches, do the neck and arm shaping, knit in the round. As far as shaping and construction is very, very simple. And so I didn't find anything about this pattern particularly groundbreaking as far as the construction or the design is concerned, but you don't really need it for something as simple as a vest like this. If I were to attempt some of her more intricate patterns that have more of a unique design elements or construction elements, maybe my experience will be a little bit different, but this pattern itself is very straightforward. Nothing, no fluff about it. It's just a V-neck vest. And honestly, that's exactly what I was expecting from it. So I would say the pattern met my expectations. I chose to do an Italian sewn bind off, as I often do with 1x1 rib, for both the neck, the arms, and the hem at the bottom. This pattern took me just under 3 weeks to complete. So it was a relatively quick knit. even with all the broken rib, I think if this was a stockinette V-neck vest, it probably would have taken me closer to 2 weeks if I put the same type of enthusiasm into it. But again, this broken rib is not for the faint of heart. So it's just a lot. I will say though, I'm glad I'm attempting this pattern now since I've switched to flicking as opposed to throwing, which is just referring to the way I tension my yarn when I knit, because I'm a much faster knitter now than I was when I first started knitting. So I'm grateful for the speed of knitting that I do have, because otherwise this would have been a really, really daunting project. As far as the details, I really appreciate the details along the armhole shaping. So she has you do increases several stitches into the broken rib, and maybe I'll do a close-up so you can get a better idea of what I'm talking about. But I really like the way that looked, and it's kind of one of those small details that makes me go, I like that. So that's one of the things. Other than that, yeah, very, very straightforward pattern. And yeah, even though the broken rib tested me, it didn't break me enough to where I never wanted to do broken rib again. Definitely took a break from it, obviously. But I have since cast on the Friday tee, which, if you're not familiar with the Friday tee, it is the same fabric in the sense that it is 1x1 broken rib. But the Friday tee is on smaller needles with lighter yarn, and there are sleeves involved. So just overall, you are signing up for a lot more knitting than with the Friday Slipover. But hear me out. I loved how this turned out so much that I knew I would like the Friday tee. So I just went for it, even though I knew it was going to be a slog, because I am a self-proclaimed product knitter as opposed to a process knitter. So I will power through and persevere through an unpleasant knitting experience if it means at the end of it I end up with a piece that I love and I know I'll wear. So yeah, Friday tee is underway. Before I show you, I have done a modification that is making it an even more tedious knit than it is already, and I chose to modify for it to have long sleeves. So the pattern as written is already bad enough. I just chose to just throw salt in that wound and just get her done. Mainly because of the yarn choice that I made. So I like the Friday tee. It is a top-down raglan. This is the front. It's a top-down raglan in the same broken rib stitch. As you can see, I've already finished one sleeve, and I have done a gradual tapering towards the cuff so that it has a fitted, it's warm, so that it is fitted down the length of my arm, which wasn't too difficult to do. I think the stripes make it really easy to have a natural place to space out your decreases. There's some really nice short row shaping in the back here. There is a folded collar that I really like. And yeah, other than that, very simple. Similar to the Friday Slipover, there is that continuous column of stitches along the raglan. Can't remember how many stitches wide the raglan is, but you can see that there's a distinct pattern that sort of flows down the raglan and then down the body of the sweater. And I think that is just a really nice touch. But other than that, a very simple classic knit. And as simple as it is, it's still a test of your knitwear or knitting stamina, because again, all broken rib. It is what it is. So I have been trudging through this for well over a month now. I have other projects on the go, so this is going to be on hold for about a week, but I think the second sleeve will take me about a week to complete, and I'm super excited to finally have this off my needles. But that's the current status of that. But the reason I chose to modify for the longer sleeves is because I chose a wool yarn. So I'll show you which yarn. For the main color, I've chosen Kelburn Woolens Camper. In this pretty gray color, it's called Graphite Heather. For contrast color 1 is another color in the same yarn called Gray Heather. And for contrast color 2, we have Hudson and Westco Weld, which is another wool yarn. The color is Tobacco. Really, really like this color. I didn't plan to combine them in this way. I knew I wanted to make the Friday tee with long sleeves with this and this combo, but on a totally separate occasion, I acquired some of this yarn and I thought, perfect. I mean, I'm not wrong. So that's the yarn I'm using. The weld is 70% merino and 30% Corriedale, and the camper is 100% wool. So both 100% non-superwash wool blends of yarn. I just knew that this in a textured fabric as a short sleeve tee, it just wasn't a smart combination. So it made more sense to me to modify for the longer sleeves, even though that's a considerable amount of additional knitting than the pattern is as written. But that said, I'm loving the way it's turning out, and I know I just cannot wait till this is done because I am going to wear it endlessly, and I am already thinking up new colors and yarns and striping to do for future versions of it. I do eventually want to knit a short sleeve pattern or a short sleeve version of this design and a summer blend yarn, so maybe a cotton or linen and wool blend, so that it's not just full on 100% non-superwash wool. And that way I'll be able to do the short sleeves, and I think it will make more sense to do the short sleeves with a different fiber. But yeah, that's where we're at. So yeah, thanks for bearing with me. If you follow me on Instagram, you will have known about the completion of this vest months ago when I finished it. And I have mentioned this video and it's taken several months to get here, but thanks for sticking it out and bearing with me. I am gonna go take this vest off first and foremost, finish my afternoon iced coffee, and do some knitting.